Dr. Anya Hamrick, a former English professor who is now in computer science. Welcome to my crash course on technical writing in computer science. This is video 6, the research process in technical communication, and this is the final video in this series. In it, we will take a look at the importance of thinking critically about research, at differentiating primary versus secondary sources. We will explore secondary sources in more detail. We will compare hard copy versus online sources. We'll take a look at online secondary sources, as well as at some strategies for researching online. We will also look at primary sources, at some strategies for informational interviews, and strategies for conducting surveys. Let's jump right in. In conducting your research, it is important to ask the right questions. Starting out with researching your topic, you should ask specific, narrow questions as opposed to overly general ones. You should also explore a balance of views. You should consider the topic from multiple angles, as well as consider the perspectives from multiple experts. You should examine points on which the experts not only agree, but also disagree. Your topic should also be explored in sufficient depth, and you should always evaluate your sources and their credibility. In doing so, you should check the source's credentials and weed out any sources with a potential agenda. You should also interpret your findings objectively. Dealing with research, you're looking at two main types of sources, primary and secondary. Primary research involves getting information directly from the source by conducting interviews and surveys and by observing people, events, or processes in action. Secondary research, on the other hand, involves getting information secondhand by reading what other researchers have compiled in books and articles in print or online. And whenever possible, you want to combine primary and secondary research. You often would want to start with secondary research to gain an overview of your chosen field and topic, and then conduct primary research to add your own contribution to the field and add to the credibility of your research. When it comes to secondary sources, some of the examples are websites, online news outlets and magazines, blogs and wikis, books in a library, journals, newspapers and magazine articles, government publications, and other public records. When conducting your research, you are faced with the choice between hard copy versus online sources, and each has its benefits and drawbacks. When it comes to hard copy sources, for example, the benefits are that those sources are available on library shelves where you might easily find related material. Those sources are easy when it comes to determining the author, publication date, and page number, and it's also easier to preserve and keep those sources secure. Of course, there are also drawbacks. Using those sources is time-consuming and inefficient to search. They offer only text and images, and content may not be up to date. When it comes to dealing with online sources, the benefits are that those sources are often more current, efficient, and accessible. Searches can be narrowed or broadened easily, and they can offer material that has no hard copy equivalent. Of course, there are drawbacks as well, and they are that older content that has not been scanned may no longer be available. Some websites may be unreliable, and the researcher might get confused by too many choices. Taking a closer look at online secondary sources, you're looking at a couple of options. One is subject directories, and those are indexes compiled by editors who sift through websites and sort the most useful links. The second option is search engines, and these tend to be less effective because they are in fact maintained by computers as opposed to real people. When it comes to some useful strategies for researching online, you should expect limited results from any one search engine or subject directory. Therefore, you should aim to using multiple ones and combining that information. When using a search engine, it is important to select keywords or search phrases that are varied, and technical rather than general. If you are using a subject directory, it is important to drill down to an appropriate level of specificity. It is not reasonable to expect to find what you need at the top or the most general topic level. You should also consider the domain type or where the site originates. It is often helpful to prioritize .gov, government, .mil, military, .edu, education affiliated, and .org domains as opposed to the more general .com or .net domains. It is also important to identify the site's purpose and sponsor as to weed out any potential problematic agendas. You should also look beyond the style of the site. A flashy site does not necessarily indicate reliable content, and conversely, important information might be included in a very simple, Spartan-looking site. You should assess the currency of the site and its materials by asking when was the material created, posted, and updated. It is important to assess the author's credentials and assertions. You should always check the author's reputation, expertise, and institutional affiliation. You should also ask yourself where on the spectrum of expert opinion and accepted theory does this author fall? And in assessing the author's assertions, you should make sure that each claim is in fact supported by solid evidence. You should also verify any extreme claims by looking at other reputable sources. It is important to save or print what you need before it changes. And as always, you should download only what you need, use it ethically, obtain permission when needed, and always credit your sources. When it comes to primary sources, you're looking at 5 options. Unsolicited inquiries, when you ask experts to provide information by reaching out through letters, phone calls, or most commonly through email. And these should be limited to 1 to 2 questions that don't require extensive research or thought on the part of your respondent. You also have the option of conducting informational interviews, and that is a solicited, extended form of interview with an expert in a field you're interested in. You can also conduct surveys. These help form impressions of the concerns, preferences, attitudes, beliefs, or perceptions of a large identifiable group, what we would call a target group, by studying representatives of that group or a sample. You can also conduct observations, which are first-hand examinations of people, processes, and so on, using only your senses. You can conduct experiments, which are controlled forms of observations designed to verify your assumptions. A few tips when it comes to informational interviews and surveys, the 2 most commonly used forms of gathering primary research. When it comes to informational interviews, it is important to know exactly what you're seeking. It is helpful to write a purpose statement ahead of time. It is important to do your homework and learn all you can about both the topic and your interviewee beforehand. You should request the interview at your respondent's convenience, and you should also make each question clear, specific, and open-ended. It is important to avoid loaded questions. Those are questions that promote a particular bias or agenda. And it is helpful to save the most difficult, complex, or sensitive questions for last. You do not want to antagonize or annoy your interviewees early on. It is also important to be polite and professional, and let your interviewee do most of the talking. Whenever needed, you should ask for clarification, but you should be careful not to put words in your respondent's mouth. Stick to your interview plan. It is also helpful to ask for closing comments and for permission to follow up. It is helpful to invite the interviewee to read your version of the interview. End on time and thank the interviewee for participating. And when you're done, as soon as possible, transcribe your notes or recordings. When it comes to helpful tips conducting surveys, it is important to define the survey's purpose and target population. You should also identify the sample group that you will be working with and the survey method. Will you administer it by phone, mail, or most commonly online? You should decide on the types of questions well ahead of time and develop an engaging, informative introduction. You should phrase your questions precisely and avoid loaded questions or questions that promote a particular bias or agenda. The survey should be kept brief, simple, and inviting, and whenever possible, you should have an expert in the field review your questionnaire. This concludes Video 6, Conducting Research on Technical Topics, and concludes the series as a whole. I'm Dr. Anya Hamrick. Thank you for your attention, and good luck.